do it after. Okay, so we're going to start. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today on this Saturday afternoon, morning for some, night for some, and midday for the others. But welcome. Thank you so much for joining. We have made it to our 7th episode, and that is just amazing. I did not realize it's been 7 episodes. This is our 7th and very exciting episode today with Sonia. My name is Sanmit Singh, and I'm joining you guys again from the East Coast in Maryland. Today, we'll be talking about the Dr. Kapany and Stinder Kapany collection all the way in sunny California. So in our quest for Sikh treasures around the world, we will be traveling to California. And with us today, joining us is Sonia Dhami from California. Before we begin, I wanted to talk about our next shows. Our next shows are going to be on the 10th and the 24th October. Some very exciting episodes, and we will be sharing that flyer with you at the end of this live. I want to go ahead and play this video for everybody. I think Sonia can click play on that. That will give you a little bit of an insight on the Sikh Foundation before we begin, so you have some context on the Sikh Foundation.
Can you see the video?
Soon after its establishment, the Sikh Foundation immersed itself in literary pursuits, publishing books and journals. But the course of history, set in motion in the Punjab in the 80s, engulfed all academic and artistic ambitions for now. The weekly newspaper, the Sikh Times, was launched in 1984. Full-page advertisements in leading American newspapers were published to educate Americans about Sikhs. Pioneering the display of Sikh arts, the first Sikh art exhibit opened in 1992 in San Francisco at the Asian Art Museum. Another major initiative was the establishment of the Kundan Kaur Kapany Chair of Sikh and Punjabi Language Studies, the first of its kind at the University of California, Santa Barbara, commemorating the 25th anniversary of the Sikh Foundation. The first permanent Sikh art gallery was established at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco in 2003. In all, 7 Sikh art exhibits supported by the foundation have been displayed at leading museums all over the world, including the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the Smithsonian in DC, Rubin Museum of Art in New York, and the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. 3 chairs of Sikh studies set up by the Sikh Foundation at University of California campuses at Santa Barbara, Riverside, and Santa Cruz, and a Sikh Studies program at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley are amongst the 6 endowed chairs and numerous programs running all over the United States with the support from the community. These chairs and programs create an enduring legacy, educating generations of students. With increasing number of scholars of Sikh studies, the field has expanded from religion and history to also include economics, conservation, and art. Continuing in our mission to create high-quality resources for the academic and artistic study of Sikhism, our latest publication, Sikh Arts from the Kapany Collection, co-published with the Smithsonian Institute, documents this unrivaled collection of art. As we look to the future, we think about new ways to maintain our connection with our past heritage so that our future generations can also be inspired, engaged, and educated all over the world.
All right, everybody. Before we begin, I just wanted to note 2 things. One, if you could please share this video on your Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, so more people can join us live or watch us later. And two, if you have any questions, you can type them in the comments section of the live video, and we will be answering questions at the end of the live. Thank you again for joining us. And I want to begin by introducing Sonia. Sonia Dhami is a trustee of the Sikh Foundation and president of Art and Tolerance, and serves as a commissioner of fine arts for the city of Cupertino, California. She's a co-editor of the Sikh Art from the Kapany Collection, a definite volume on Sikh art co-published with the Smithsonian Institution. She also has edited a richly illustrated volume, Games We Play. Her work demonstrates the confluence of art, history, religion, and community. Early in her career, she worked on art and architecture projects with the Sikh institutions in India, UK, Canada, and the USA. She has been closely associated with organizing, assisting many conferences, community events, publications, and Sikh art displays, including the very recent Expressions of Divinity at the Triton Museum of Art in Santa Clara. She received her education in India and graduated from St. Bede's College in Shimla. She earned her master's in business administration from Punjab Agricultural University in Ludhiana. Her work demonstrates the confluence of art, history, religion, and community. And we're blessed to have Sonia in our community in the United States. I'm so glad she lives in America and not like everybody else in UK and India that is associated with Sikh art. So she's approachable. I have her phone number. I'm just so happy that Sonia is accessible to young folks like myself. And very thankful for Dr. Kapani for starting this sort of Sikh art revolution in the diaspora where, 50 years ago, nobody would have thought Sikh art was a subject of collection or study or even just to talk about. Paintings and art and artifacts were just things. Nobody really grouped them into an area of study where now there's papers, conferences, books being written about this subject. So really grateful, and this is a really great opportunity for us to listen to Sonia dive into this amazing collection of Sikh art and artifacts. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sonia and we'll get started. Sonia, over to you.
Thank you, Sanmet. Thank you for all the kind words, this wonderful introduction. And it's my pleasure to be and a privilege to be here today and to talk about the Kapany collection, which is renowned the world over. And should I just share my screen now?
Yep.
Please get the presentation set up.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Do you see it, Sanmet?
Yep, it's working perfectly.
Right. All right. So, okay. So, so thank you everyone for joining from all over the world. Everyone has been such a big support in this journey. We are in the 7th episode today. And we are finally talking about the Kapany collection, the collection which has really started this whole pursuit for people like me, Sanmet, and a whole generation of folks who are now looking at our heritage and trying to find it, dig it out, as well as very proudly share it with the rest of the world. So starting with my presentation today, I will start with that the renowned Kapany collection of Sikh art is a labor of love. It has been lovingly put together over many, many years by Satinder Kaur and Narendra Singh Kapany. A collection of this range takes decades of painstaking work, backed by, of course, resources, but more importantly, the vision. It includes some beautiful portraits of the Sikh Gurus, illustrated manuscripts, spectacular paintings of the Golden Temple, royal arts and treasures of the Sikh Maharajas, arms and armaments, coins, stamps, textiles, and contemporary arts. In 2017, I had the honor to co-edit the volume Sikh Arts from the Kapany Collection, which documents the wide range and the depth of the Sikh artistic expression over its 550-year history. Through different chapters written by experts, historians, curators, and professors, Dr. Pushora Singh, Dr. Nirvikar Singh, Dr. Gurinder Maan, Dr. Nikki Kuninder Kaur, Dr. Mohinder Singh, Dr. Lafont, Peter Baines, Navdeep Sarna, Jyoti Rai, Dr. Walker, Dr. Kristen McKnight, Dr. Mary Ann Lutzker, Dr. Gurnam Brar, and Ms. Kiki Kapani. Along with my co-editor, the distinguished Dr. Paul Michael Taylor of the Smithsonian, we respectfully dedicated the book to the memory of Satinder Kaur Kapani, who sadly passed away in 2016. When I look back, I can say that because of this study, today I have a better and a clearer appreciation for the artistic traditions and heritage of the Sikh community that goes back not just to the 19th century as widely believed, but 5 centuries right to the time of our Gurus. I've also had the honor to work with Dr. Kapani himself for almost 15 years now. And during this time, I have heard him recall the story of how it all began. Years back when he was just a little boy. And I'd like to share that story with you today, right in the beginning. It starts in the town of Patiala with a grandmother lovingly called Manji and a 10-year-old grandson who spends the long summer afternoons with her. So every afternoon after finishing her day's work, Manji would gather around her the women of the neighborhood, and sitting on the floor of the courtyard, she would bring out this old family manuscript called a Janam Sakhi. Now, a Janam Sakhi, as most of you know, is a book containing the life stories of Guru Nanak, the founder of the Sikh faith. And this particular manuscript had been commissioned some 100 years prior to that time by her ancestor, who was the head of the Patna Sahib Gurdwara in Bihar. Now, Manji is a skilled storyteller. Her voice is melodic and full of life, as are the stories that she reads, which are animated and colorful in their tone and descriptions. And these stories are also brilliantly illustrated with magnificent paintings. So Manji would read the story first, and then she would carefully pass this volume around the women, urging each one to look at the paintings and to touch the pages so as to commune with the Guru's life in that moment. And so each afternoon, a new story would be told. Now, while the stories in the Janam Sakhi are surely exaggerated to deepen the belief of the faithful, perhaps, and they mostly end on these miraculous endings, like Guru Nanak waters his fields from thousands of miles away in Punjab from Haridwar, or Guru Nanak turns the Kaaba, and so on and so forth. But the legacy that this manuscript has ensured is nothing short of a miracle. The 10-year boy who was part of these animated conversations is none other than Narendra Singh Kapani. He eventually inherits this manuscript, and it inspires the Kapanis to gather this spectacular collection of Sikh art. And today, these brilliant paintings occupy a place of pride at the acclaimed Asian Art Museum here in San Francisco. So this is the story of how it all began with a woman, because they are the custodians of the stories in our families. Now, as we continue looking at a few other paintings of Guru Nanak from the Kapany collection. So I just want to bring in this section, since we are on the portraits of Guru Nanak, before I begin the main body of the presentation. So starting with this 18th century portrait, what we see here is a pious man, elderly man, who is reading from a small red book. Now, if you judge by his headgear and his clothes, he might be a Muslim peer or a saint. But when we read the inscription, which is at the top of this painting, which I'm using my pointer to show to you on the full painting on the right, we see the Persian inscription, which says, Tasveer-e-Darwesh Nanak Shahi. Now, the Asian Art Museum has interpreted this as a portrait of Guru Nanak himself. But it can also be a portrait of a follower of Nanak who were known as Nanak Shahis. And this painting we know is from the Lucknow or the Murshidabad school. And perhaps we can safely guess that it was painted by a Muslim artist who has depicted the Guru or his follower in his vision of what a holy man looks like. Now, from the 17th century, we move to the, from the 18th, we move to the 19th century, and we see this richly colored miniature painting of Guru Nanak with the Guru centrally placed, sitting on a raised stool and reading, or perhaps singing kirtan from a red book held high in his left hand, which is resting on a sadhu's staff, while Pai Mardana plays the rabab and a devotee reverently waves a peacock feather whisk. Now this time, the Guru appears as a sant or a saint, sadhu from the Hindu tradition, which is indicated to us from the tilak marks on his forehead, the bairagi under his shoulders, the yellow robes and a mala around his neck. Now, perhaps here the artist was a Hindu and has painted the Guru in his vision of a holy man. So now, having looked at these two very different paintings of the same person, the question that comes to mind is, so what does the real Nanak look like? The fact is that we don't know, since no portrait of the Guru was made during his lifetime. This painting in the traditional representational style by the 20th century popular Sikh artist Sardar Shobha Singh, who yet again portrays Guru Nanak differently, but someone we can finally recognize as a Sikh of today. Now, this portrait is a manifestation of Shobha Singh's meditations and devotions to the Guru. Except for the halo, which signifies divinity, Guru Nanak now looks like a grandfatherly Sikh of our times. Moving even further now, coming to the 21st century, Arpana Kaur, artist whose works are well represented in the collection, paints Guru Nanak in a figurative and not a representational style. This painting depicts the Sakhi, or the story of Guru Nanak's encounter with the Saint Wali Kandhari at Hassan Abdal, where today the Panja Sahib Gurdwara stands. And having now looked at paintings of the first Guru, Guru Nanak, from 4 centuries, we can safely say that these are not representations of the historic Nanak, but of a man of that time and society, painted by different artists from different backgrounds and faiths, just as they envisioned him to be, how they think Guru Nanak looked. We find that if the artist is a Hindu, she imagines him as a sadhu from the Hindu tradition. If the artist is Muslim, he imagines him as a Muslim peer. And for me, this is the timeless beauty and aesthetic of the visual memory of Guru Nanak. He is as you imagine him to be. Nanak Shah Fakir, Hindu ka Guru, Musalman ka Peer. This is how the world loves and experiences Baba Nanak. And this I have learned, which I think is a very important lesson, by looking at the paintings in the Kapany collection, reminding me of the importance of art in understanding history and our shared heritage. I feel art is another way to understand history and our roots. And when I look at the individual pieces in the collection, I can see our history reflected back in them. And this is how I will attempt to share with you the highlights of the Kapany collection today. And I found it useful to divide Sikh history into 5 different phases, especially when I'm looking at the artworks. The first is the Guru period, which encompasses the 15th, 16th, and the 17th centuries, starting from the birth of Guru Nanak in 1469 to the death of Guru Gobind Singh, the 10th Guru, in 1708. This is followed by the 18th century, which is a very tumultuous and a very difficult period in Sikh history, and is dominated by the history of the missiles, of how they evolved as a response to Mughal tyranny, and which continues till the end of the 18th century. But then it brings us to the 19th century, where now the tables are turned, the hunted have become the rulers, and this is dominated by the Sikh Maharajas, including Ranjit Singh and the British rule in Punjab, which is followed by the 20th and the 21st centuries, which I've put in as modern and contemporary for my understanding. And what I'm going to attempt to do in the next half an hour or so is to place the artwork in its rightful and chronological period. By doing this, we can understand how our history developed, and looking at it by the developing art around it as well. And that's how I've structured the rest of the presentation. So here we get the show on the road now. I start with the Guru period, and this is one of the oldest paintings from the collection and has been identified by the Asian Art Museum as a portrait of Guru Tegh Bahadur, dated to 1670. This makes it a very important painting because it is a rare contemporary portrait of the Guru, meaning that it was painted during the lifetime of the Guru himself. And from a date we realize is only 5 years later that Guru Tegh Bahadur is martyred in Delhi under the orders of Emperor Aurangzeb. Dressed in bright orange clothes, a jama, the Guru holds a hawk on his left gloved hand and stands like a beacon in a broad brushed green background that is characteristic of 17th century Mughal school of painting. The quiet heroism of Guru Tegh Bahadur is vividly captured in this painting. Now we move to the 18th century. And we see that after the death of Guru Gobind Singh in 1708 and subsequently of Banda Singh Bahadur, the Punjab is plunged further into turmoil. Persecuted by Mughal rulers, the Khalsa Sikhs organized themselves into mainly 12 Sikh missals or confederacies. This was a time when Sikhs did not even have a home. They lived in the jungles, fighting and on the move. There was literally a price on each Sikh head. Because of these unsettling times, we understandably don't have a lot of art surviving from the 17th century. Some of the manuscripts and paintings which have survived include this fine portrait of Guru Har Gobind standing on a carpeted terrace. Now, the style of this painting is Mughal because the artists were mainly trained in this style. And many of them, after losing royal Mughal patronage during the reign of Aurangzeb, moved to the courts of the Rajas of the Punjab plains and in the hills. And this painting is probably an idealized rendering of the Guru and is only identified from an inscription on the back of the painting. Now, towards the end of the 18th century, the tables have turned. The declining Mughal authority is now balanced by a rising power of the Sikh missals, who now control vast territories in the Punjab. The Pangi missal, one of the missals which controlled territory in the northwest of Punjab, took control of Lahore in 1765 and immediately struck their coins as a mark of sovereignty. Now, the coinage from this period is mostly attributed to two missals, the Pangi missal and the Kanhaiya missal, which controlled areas around Amritsar. And when they struck their coins, they used a Persian couplet from the seal of Guru Gobind Singh, which translates as abundance the sword, victory and help without delay, Guru Gobind Singh obtained from Nanak. Now, Sikh coinage is also called Nanak Shahi because it is unique in not being struck in the name of the ruler or the Maharaja, but in the name of Guru Nanak. These coins also carry elegant motifs of leaves, as we can see in the picture of the coin from the Amritsar Mint from 1791. And while others had motifs of flowers, sunbursts, branches, and so on. Now, the advent of the 19th century heralded a new era in Sikh history. Ranjit Singh becomes Maharaja and the Lahore Darbar starts to consolidate the warring Sikh missals to create the first indigenous empire in the Punjab, which effectively stops all foreign invasions from the West, which had plagued the Indian heartland unchecked for 800 years. And this has an enduring effect on the arts that we now see flourishing in the Punjab, not just in Ranjit Singh's domains, but also in the Sis Satluj states of Patiala, Naba, Jind, Kapurthala, etc. These are the Sikh kingdoms which were south of the Satluj. Now, many of the artists are continuing to migrate from the declining Mughal Darbar to the Punjab, where they now find patronage in the courts of the Pahari and the Sikh Rajas. The next 50 years could be said to be the golden period for Sikh arts. The patronage of Maharaja Ranjit Singh spurs shawl and carpet production in the Kashmir. Miniature paintings flourished, coins were minted, illustrated manuscripts were created, fine arms and armaments were forged, jewelry and jewels, metal engraving of the highest quality, as seen in the Golden Temple, paintings adorned monuments. A distinguished style of Sikh architecture is emerging. And the Kapany collection is particularly very, very strong in this period. And I'd like to share a sampling of the high quality of works and the range of the works that are now being produced. As this magnificent emerald ring, which belonged to Maharaja Ranjit Singh and was used by him to seal his documents. It is now on display at the Asian Art Museum here in San Francisco. And I encourage all of you who can to visit the museum to see this and many other artworks. And you'll be glad to know that the museum is reopening very soon. So that's a new era as well. Now, it is through military conquest that the Sikh Empire at its zenith extended to the Khyber Pass in the northwest, to Kashmir, Ladakh, and Punjab hills in the northeast, up till Sindh and Rajputana in the south, and the Suleiman Range in the west. The military discipline and pride are perfectly evoked in the exquisite artistry of this 19th century steel helmet overlaid with gold, uniquely designed to accommodate the Sikh turban or the top knot of the soldiers. This is an early 19th century painting. And by this time, Ranjit Singh has gained domination and also annexed many of the Rajput hill states of the Punjab hills of Kangra, Chamba, Basoli, Mandi, etc. And the famed Pahari artists are now also serving new patrons. This painting is from the workshop of Purkhu of Kangra and is a particularly interesting work on paper depicting all the 10 Sikh Gurus, as well as the two famous companions of Guru Nanak, Pai Bala and Pai Mardana with the Rabab, highlighting the centrality of music in the Sikh tradition. The name of each of the Guru is inscribed in Gurmukhi script, except Guru Gobind Singh, who is shown with his 4 sons at the, if you see my pointer, this is Guru Gobind Singh, and these are his 4 sons sitting in front of him. Now, strikingly, the artist has also included some very subtle messaging in this painting. Each of the Gurus whose verses are enshrined in the holy scriptures, the Shri Guru Granth Sahib, their portraits have a book placed next to them. For example, this is Guru Nanak. He has a book placed in front of him. Guru Angad, Guru Amar Das, Guru Ram Das, Guru Arjan Dev, and then on this side, we have Guru Tegh Bahadur. So these are some subtle messages how the artists put in and convey. Coming to this painting, which is dated to 1830 and is of the 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh, astride his blue stallion with his hawk and sword, flanked by 3 attendants, is set amidst a verdant green landscape of rolling hills. The perspective of this setting, probably Western influenced, but the figures are very traditionally rendered. The Guru is dressed in fine clothes, adorned with jewelry, sporting a kalgi on his turban. He holds the reins of his horse, on which is perched his white hawk. The artist has drawn a halo around his head, signifying his high spiritual position. This is an exquisite example of the fine workmanship of the artists under the patronage of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Here we see the Maharaja sitting opposite his favored courtier, Raja Hira Singh. They're both sitting on European-style chairs, and it is through symbolism of the chairs that the artist has shown the difference in their social status. The Maharaja's chair appears bigger and also has a footstool in front, while that of Hira Singh is a smaller chair. So this is another way that artists put in subtle messaging in their creations to convey meaning without the use of words. Another work of Pahari artists from the same time period shows a hunting party armed with matchlocks, spears, and swords. We see a ruler takes aim from a raised platform on the right side of the painting. And in the background, we can see groups of drum beaters whose job it was to round up the wildlife towards the shoot. And overall, it's a pretty gruesome scene with bloodied animals. There is a deer, you have a doe and a fawn, and as well as you see injured men which are being gored on the ground by a wild boar. But so it's pretty gross. But what is remarkable is the complexity of the composition and its expert rendering. Now, the grandeur of the Sikh kingdoms, it attracted artists and travelers from all over the world, including Emily Eden, a gifted amateur artist who was also the sister of the then Governor General of India. In 1836, she sketched Maharaja Ranjit Singh and a number of members of his court, including this portrait of Sher Singh, which is part of a bound set of prints published in 1844 in London, wherein she writes that Sher Singh appeared for his sitting, quote, all over diamonds and emeralds, unquote. Her lithographs are tinged with a very calm and delicate appreciation of the characters and the architecture. This marvelous watercolor on paper is a study of zamindars from the Punjab. The date of the painting of 1917 and its striking resemblance to the paintings in the Fraser album remind us of William Fraser, who traveled in the Punjab with artists in his entourage, documenting the people he encountered at that time. Now, after the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh in 1839, the Punjab is again plunged into chaos and turmoil. With 4 quick successions of Maharajas, Khadak Singh, Maharani Chandkaur, Sher Singh, and finally Dalip Singh, till the annexation of the Punjab by the British in 1849. The Russian prince, Alexis Saltykov, visited the Lahore court at the time of the reign of Maharaja Sher Singh. And he created some wildly and wonderfully romantic lithographs. They are full of tall, impressive warriors, some bearing standards and flags, dressed in silks and glittering with jewels, riding horses, decorated with enormous pearls, emeralds, and rubies. Now, unlike Ranjit Singh's kingdom, which after his death turned into a bloodbath of warring Sikh factions that made it easy prey for the British, the Cis-Satluj states of the Fulkiya kingdoms of Patiala, Naba, Faridpur, Jind, and Kapurthala did not fall to the British. But instead, they signed treaties which enabled them to keep their own courts and armies until India's independence in 1947. Here, business boomed for portraiture and courtly and military scene paintings. So we see Ranjit Singh's contemporary, Maharaja Karam Singh of Patiala, and his son Narendra Singh in full European military dress. And if you note that the chair that Maharaja Karam Singh is sitting on is quite similar to the one we saw in the previous painting of Maharaja Ranjit Singh with Hira Singh. Maharaja Narendra Singh, who follows Karam Singh, is acclaimed to be the most enlightened ruler of Patiala. And it is during his reign that artists came from far and wide to work in his court. This painting shows the Maharaja not in the plains of Patiala, but in a hilly area riding up the ramparts of a fort on an elephant. And for once we know the artist, since the painting is signed Bashrat Ullah, the artist whose family had migrated from Lahore. Now, the Kapany collection has an interesting series of some exquisite, large miniature paintings from the 1850s depicting historical events. This painting is of Maharaja Sher Singh entertaining Dost Muhammad, the Amir of Kabul, who is seated on a chair while Sher Singh is on the floor, which suggests that this painting was not commissioned by a Sikh patron. So here we can see this is Dost Muhammad, the lone person sitting on the chair, and we have Sher Singh sitting here on the ground. Now, there are other paintings by the same artist or workshop, and these are now dispersed in several collections, including the Aga Khan in Toronto. This is a masterpiece from the Kapany collection, shows the saint by Bir Singh at his riverside encampment. As we examine the details of this painting, we see an entire world of communal activity. Men and women from diverse backgrounds are making offerings and paying their respects to the holy man. You can see in the detail that I've added here on the right, we have a new bride who's being brought to seek the saint's blessings. Then food is being cooked and Guru Ka Langar is served to all people. We also see people with different physical afflictions who have probably traveled on hearing of the saint's arrival. And then on another corner of the painting, in this detail here on the top, we see some prepared the intoxicant marijuana-based drink called sukha in this whole melee of devotion and activity. This is a delightful painting, watercolor, and it shows a wedding procession with the young groom astride a horse, a dark-colored horse, very centrally placed, while the women of the household, we can see, are shown in parda by the artist by drawing this red curtain around them. So this is the groom, and these are the women of the household. And other than that, we have musicians and dancers play in the foreground. We have these drums on these two camels, one in the front and one at the back. There is a toll player here. There are flute players. And then you'll also find people all dressed in jewelry and their best clothes. And you find this whole scene of women and this elderly woman who's probably admonishing the younger one. And on this side, you have this group of young boys probably gossiping. So it's on the whole, it's such a delightful and such a pleasurable painting from the collection. It's one of my favorites, and Sikh Foundation also has this printed on greeting cards, which are available for sale if you'd like. And I love to give these out, especially on weddings. So now coming to the late 19th century, we find the Maharaja Ranjit Singh's empire has ceased to exist, and the artists are now serving again new patrons, which are now the British and the East India Company. Now, these tourist-minded Britons wish to take back with them scenes of the curious and the exotic East, spawning a new genre called company art, which, though done by Indian artists, took its stylistic cues from the representation art of the British Victorians. And one of the popular artworks are paintings like these, which are part of albums or bound notebooks, each with 40 to 60 sketches on each page, which could be different subjects like royalty, monuments, shrines, soldiers, and vignettes of life of the common people in the Punjab, as we see in this folio, which shows a native doctor or a hakim examining a sick child brought in by his mother. Now, by now, Dalip Singh, the last Maharaja of the Punjab, is living in England, where his mother, Maharani Jind Kaur, joins him in 1860. He commissions the artist George Richmond, who impressively captures her beauty, daring, and defiance, which is the stuff of legends and folklore. The Rani is wearing a blue and gold dress adorned with her fabulous jewels. Now, at the time of this portrait, she was almost blind with cataract and was plagued with ill health. She died a year later at the young age of 46. Now, she is known to have sat very reluctantly for this painting, though it is through this portrait that she is alive in our collective memories today. So for me, this is a very, very important painting, not just for its beauty or value, but also for the critical role that this painting has played in reviving the memory of Maharani Jind Kaur in Sikh history. This next slide is a necklace, which was one of the highlights of the collection, but shockingly went missing, presumably stolen while in transit to a museum for display in 2015. I included this today just so that everyone is aware of this incident and can keep a lookout for whenever and wherever the necklace might resurface. Now, the traditional medium of Indian artists it has been watercolors. And the later part of the 19th century saw many Sikh artists making the transition to oil paintings. Kapoor Singh of Amritsar is one of the leading names of that time. And this painting of the Harmandir Sahib reflected in the Sarovar with a number of worshippers, including a Nihang in his blue bana and his distinctive headgear, stand at the edge of the Sarovar. In the blue sky above, birds take flight. And interestingly, this painting is inscribed in English. And on the lower left-hand corner, the artist has put his initials KS. And on the verso or the back of the painting, we have the title of the painting is Golden Temple of Amritsar, dated to 1886. And a very unusual pictorial Kirman rug from Iran shows Maharaja Sher Singh with his entourage. And it depicts the meeting of probably two Sikh groups or entourages, which is Raja Dhyan Singh and Maharaja Sher Singh. And it is with this painting that we now end the section on the 19th century highlights from the Kapany collection. And as you could see in the past slides that I've shared with you, you probably get an appreciation of the strength of the collection in this period. Now we begin the 20th century, which is marked by the beginning of the Great War of 1914. Sikh soldiers of the Indian British Army see action in many parts of the world, including the Middle East, Europe, and Burma. But wherever the Sikh regiments were stationed, they carried with them the Guru Granth Sahib. And to facilitate easy transportation, miniature volumes of the Holy Scriptures were printed and distributed amongst the soldiers. Today, sadly, not many of these volumes survive, and the Kapany collection has this unique Sri Guru Granth Sahib, along with its silver palki for its display and storage. The 20th century also continued to attract artists from all around the world. California artist, this is coming close to home, Hubert J. Stowitz travels across the length and breadth of India for 2 years, and he paints 150 portraits of musicians, dancers, craftsmen, common folks, and a few of royalty as well, with the view of preserving and documenting a vanishing India due to the fast expanding industrial age. The Kapany collection has 50 of these paintings, including this work, which shows two young men busy in their laundry. And I would love to take this opportunity to also let it out, be known to museums and other friends from the museum world, that the Sikh Foundation, and we would love to display these 50 magnificent pieces or paintings at some museum in the near future. And it's really, it just shows the multiple confluences or the interfaces that we have in the art world. You have a California artist who travels to India, paints people from all over India, as well as Sikhs, and to have that, bringing all these histories coming together, I think would make just a fabulous show. Now, moving on in our presentation to we come to the advent of the industrial age and the convenience of the printing press. Now that helps to cater to the growing demand from the masses who also want to own and display art in their homes. So entrepreneurial publishers start to print calendars and posters for mass circulation, which leads to a genre called calendar art. And here we have Guru Gobind Singh, the 10th Guru, in the 1950s poster image, which is sponsored by the Dunlop Corporation. The political and the social reforms of the 20th century, the internationalization of the community, have all brought changes to Sikh art. Gone is the grandeur and patronage of royal courts, but Sikh art continues to flourish and indeed expand in its subject matter and styles. But perhaps the most significant development of the 20th century is in the artists themselves. Not only are we now seeing distinctive works of named artists, but we are seeing women artists, enabling us to see through the eyes of women. By 1980, Arpana Kaur is making her mark on the Indian contemporary art scene. Through abstract figures, she interprets the stories of the Janam Sakhis, Punjabi folklore, and also comments on society and its ills. In her painting, titled The Wounds of 1984, an elderly Sikh man stands half naked, half robed in a white cloth, against a black background that casts the pall of endless night over the painting. He is watched by figures to the left who peer out of the compartment-like buildings. In the right panel, a seated woman, perhaps Arpana, holds up a blood-stained cloth that flows across the canvas like a silver river. For those of you who might not know the significance of the year 1984, it was during this time that this genocide against the Sikhs happened all across India in 1984, following the assassination of the Indian Prime Minister by her bodyguards who were Sikh. Other contemporary artists with significant presence in the collection is Davinder Singh with over 50 paintings. This work is part of a series on great Sikh women and depicts Rani Sada Kaur. She is the leader of the Kanhaiya missile. And this is the same missile which had struck the coins from Amritsar. Very powerful missile, controlled vast territories. And she is also the mother-in-law of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and plays a very critical role in his rise to power. And in this painting, we see Rani Sada Kaur, who had led the forces against the attack or the siege of Lahore, which then led on to Maharaja Ranjit Singh being declared the Maharaja subsequently. Artist Sukhpreet Singh from Ludhiana has created many delightful paintings reviving nostalgic memories of life in the towns and villages of Punjab. Here we see a young village boy tying his turban while balancing a small mirror between his knees, a scene or a memory that many Sikh men remember fondly from their own childhoods. Now the collection, it continues to commission new works like this marble bust of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. It has tremendous historical significance, as well as this bronze sculpture of Maharaja Ranjit Singh on horseback. Now, with this, I conclude our journey leafing through the fascinating Kapany Collection of Sikh Art and revisiting Sikh history through the lens of art. And I would like to close my presentation with this image of the Satinder Kaur Kapany Gallery of Sikh Art, which was established by the Kapanis in 2003. And it was the first permanent Sikh art gallery in a museum in the West, here at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. And I also would like to share this quote from Dr. Kapany, who's the chairman of the Sikh Foundation. I read, quote, "We also need to ensure that our friends of other faiths, races, and cultures understand who and what we are. We must present the beauty of our heritage without chauvinism. The wisdom, philosophy, and arts of the Sikh faith belong to the world, and it is time now to bring them into the light." Unquote. Thank you very much. Sanmet, over to you.
Sonia, all I have to say is wow. And I'm pretty sure we can go on for another 2 hours with the amount of objects and art that is in the Kapany collection. But thank you so much. And I've been reading some of the comments, and I think everybody's just wowed. Maybe this Zoom medium has made it a little bit easier for us to see all of these in one place, because doing something at a museum shockingly takes a lot of hours, time, and resources. So not to say that this is any easier, but thank you so much for beautifully articulating this. Before we get on to questions, I actually have a question of my own. I was wondering, what are some of the next steps for the Kapany collection? Is the Sikh Foundation or you or Dr. Kapany thinking about what you guys are going to do this year, next year, in the next 5 years?
Yes, Sanmit, that's a very, very important and a critical question. And I think every collector grapples with this question, as does the community, like myself as well, because these resources are put together with great effort. And I think the inspiration and the passion and the commitment is really for the community. That's probably how many of the collectors I know approach their collections. And I have a slide in this deck which I think can help answer this question better, which I would like to share.
Your screen is shared, so you can hit next. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. So I put this together. I was wanting to include this into the presentation itself, but then it was going over time, and time is limited, so I just couldn't put everything in there. But I'm glad you asked this question. And I put down this list as to which were the various exhibits which have been either inspired by the collection or were completely supported or have been made possible because of the collection. And we get an indication from the past years that many times it was just the availability and the willingness of the Kapanis to share this priceless art that spurred and encouraged numerous international exhibits of Sikh art around the world. And so far, we have had 10 exhibits, and these have been put up in, say, oddly 30 odd years. So it's almost like one exhibit every 3 years, and it's just a huge achievement, I would say. We started from 1992 when the Splendors of the Punjab exhibit. This was the first ever Sikh art exhibit in the West. You could even include India and other parts. It was quickly followed up by the Victoria and Albert, the blockbuster exhibit, which had over 500,000 people visit. The show traveled. It came to San Francisco. It went to Toronto, to the ROM Museum as well. And then you find in much quick succession, in 2003, the permanent galleries established at the Asian Art Museum. Then you have the Smithsonian, the very important exhibit, which opens in 2004. This exhibit then goes on to travel to, it comes to Santa Barbara, it comes to Fresno in California, and then it went to San Antonio in 2015 in Texas. And then in 2017, when the foundation celebrated its 50th anniversary, the Asian Art Museum put up a special exhibit, again displaying Sikh arts. And very recently we had, last year, Expressions of Divinity, which was the first contemporary Sikh art show in a museum in the West, or in the United States. And this was in Santa Clara at the Triton Museum. So what all these exhibits are telling me is a desire and the commitment of the collectors to share the works with the rest of the world. So whether in it, that's what it demonstrates to me of what the future is possible for this collection, which is to enrich museums and continue so that the museums can really continue to share our heritage with the world and make it accessible to all of mankind. So I know there are numerous discussions on way with many museums, but the one we signed was last year with the Montreal Museum of Art, which was to establish Canada's first permanent Sikh art gallery, which will be in Montreal. And the Kapany Collection has gifted 150 artworks to the museum. And we are possibly looking for an opening of the gallery as soon as possible. I think COVID came along and derailed a lot of things in the world, and this was one of them. But we are hoping to have this opening happen. And so there are other discussions also on with other museums in the US, in Canada, and even in India, so that you can find the best home for each of the pieces in the collection. So this is my sense of what things might look like in the future or in the coming years. But I will also add in the end, after all, this is really a question for the collectors, for Dr. Kapany. And perhaps at some point we can have the privilege of hearing him as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. So I think that is a huge task ahead of us, this 2020 or 2021 launch of another permanent gallery. And for those folks that don't know, you know, having a permanent space in a national or international museum it's sort of like buying real estate, a very, very expensive real estate, where they're going to give us, as our community, the Sikh community or the world of Sikh art, a space that is permanent. So 7 days a week, if the museum is open, you can walk in there and you can view a select few works of art from this huge donation of the Sikh Art collection by Dr. Kapani. So that is San Francisco Museum of Art, and now opening soon will be the Montreal Museum of Art, where you will find a permanent section that is dedicated to Sikh art. So it's a huge deal. I'm going to move on to the next question because I can keep going on for hours with you. We had a question from Sarabjit Singh, and I don't know if you can make this a short one. Why is there a halo around the king?
So the artists, like I did point out in a few of the paintings, they use these subtle messaging, visual messaging to tell a story in that painting. And so halos were used, whether it is to depict divinity in the case of the portraits of the Gurus, and it was also used for kings and emperors, because many of them, for example, the Mughal emperors, the Rajputs, they in their narrative is that they are the descendants of, say, God on earth, or the representative of God on earth. So there is a certain divinity associated with the royal patronage. That's the narrative that these portraits are also portraying. So that's the reason why you will find in some cases the kings also will have portraits with a halo in the back.
Absolutely. We have a question from Kulvinder Singh. Please tell us about the Kapani kids and grandkids, their role, if any, in the Sikh Foundation.
This is a little tangential, but I can definitely say both Dr. Kapani's children, his son and daughter, Raj Kapani and Kiki Kapani, have been active trustees of the foundation for many, many years. They are engaged with the activities as well as the grandchildren. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And I think this is the final question that we have. And Ashveer Pal Singh says, Sonia ji, thank you for taking the time for this event. Can you elaborate on how we can make connections between like-minded organizations and philanthropists in India? So are there any organizations like Sikh Foundation that sort of are doing similar work in India?
I think there is, when I look around within, especially the Sikh community, I find so much passion, so much activism, so much interest. Like each person is just bubbling to do something as well. And so there are many, many organizations, I'm sure. And but to answer his question very directly, us starting this web series at the Sikh Foundation, well, of course, it was accelerated by the COVID situation. But at the same time, it is also a way to put it out ourselves out there and to see that other organizations, other people, and that's what we are trying to do, is bring on people who are related into this field. We had Namita Jaspal in our last show, with you as well, Sanmit. The work that she's doing, her organization is doing, to showcase that. In our upcoming sessions, we will have Diamond Sodhi, who is the custodian of the Guru Har Sahai Pothimala buildings and the frescoes. Then there is Dr. Nadra Khan, who's a professor at LUMS in Lahore, and her work on Sikh architecture. And she will be talking about Bhai Ram Singh contribution to architecture, as well as other Sikh artisans whom we don't know about. So I think through this webinar, we have been able to bring on a same platform many different organizations and individuals. And these individuals are the face of those organizations. And that's what we hope to do, and we would love to collaborate with others as well. Pothimala building in Guru Har Sahai in Punjab on the Indian side is really in need of conservation. And if there could be local organizations whom we can muster or bring together and help to restore those priceless artifacts, which are literally crumbling away. So that's the goal, whether it is in any part of the world where our treasures and heritage lies. And like today we've covered California, where we have Sikh treasures here in California, the Kapany collection, and there are other collections as well.
Yeah, and it's good to see these treasures travel to places like Montreal and London, and even Washington, D.C. I remember I was very young when I attended the opening ceremony of the Smithsonian exhibition. And I think it was on for 4 years, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
And so in those 4 years, I remember we had any guest that came from anywhere around the world, we would first drive them to this exhibition. That what's there to see in DC? We will go to the White House later. First, we must go see the Sikhs at the Smithsonian, because it was just such a natural environment to go in and to see our things and stuff we're familiar with in an American museum, which is unheard of. When we go to museums, we always see other communities, other history. We never see Sikh historical objects. So that Smithsonian, those 4 years were amazing to take visitors and family and friends there. So thank you to the Sikh Foundation and all the donors and everybody involved that put that together. With that, I think I just want to remind everybody of our next 2 episodes that are coming up, October 10th and October 24th. Please tune in. And any last words, Sonia, before we go?
So yeah, you mentioned about the pride that you felt in having the Smithsonian exhibit and taking your visitors and your friends and family to see that. And I really wish, and I want to encourage all our community members that with the establishment of these permanent galleries in these museums, now we don't have to wait for a show which will run for 3 months or 4 months. We have those places. We have them in San Francisco at the Asian Art Museum. We have them at the Phoenix Art Museum in Phoenix, Arizona. We'll have them in Montreal. So I would encourage all of you to take your friends, your family, go yourself, and to visit these museums and make that a part of our leisure activities, which includes other fantastic things, but not so much as going to the museum. So I would really encourage everyone to visit the museums, show your support, and it's such a beautiful way to share our pride in our arts and heritage and our history.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sonia. And with that, we're going to take your leave, and I encourage everybody, when travel is open again and we're back to normal, these objects are awaiting your eyes and your darshan. Bring your kids, your family members, whether you're in San Francisco, Phoenix, or anywhere around the world. If you're in Amritsar and you go to Darbar Sahib, please do visit the museum there as well. Let's make it a habit to take our friends and family and ourselves go visit these places, so that the people that put these together are further encouraged to spend their time, energy, and resources on developing these and making them better. So thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you, Sonia. Thank you to the Sikh Foundation, and we'll see you next time. Sat Sri Akal.
Thank you, Sanmit, and thank you to everyone. Sat Sri Akal.